Right, the next thing that we're going to talk about, and essentially the last thing that we're going to talk about in the chapter about learning, is practical applications of what we've been talking about, what we've been learning. And so the textbook that I'm teaching from focuses on the potential link between video games, particularly video games of more the violent or fighter shooting style of video games, and actual real world aggression. You might be familiar of the controversy with whether or not these two things could be related, particularly if they're related in a causal manner. There are many people, I have heard many people speaking in a public forum on TV or whatnot, indicating that they clearly believe that playing these types of games leads one to be more aggressive. Is that true? Well, in science, what do we have to do? We have to gather some evidence, and lots of studies have addressed this potential link. What do they tell us? It's complicated. The short version is that it is complicated. So let's talk about some of the issues with research on this relevant real-world topic related to learning. All right, so first of all, we have to address the fact that you may remember that there is a difference between correlational studies and what we call experimental studies. In correlational studies, you determine whether two variables are related. They are linked. There's a pattern in the data where one variable increases, the other one reliably or predictably increases or decreases. They co-vary in some way. All right. It's a little stronger evidence if you're interested in a causal relationship. If you want to see that one variable causes or changes another, you can do an experiment where you control or manipulate a particular variable to isolate its effect on the dependent variable. All right. So what have they done in terms of studying the potential link between video games and aggression, or I should say violent video games? I don't think people are worried about The Sims and Stardew Valley being linked to aggression, although with The Sims you could be creative and give it a violent tone to it, or games like Minecraft, you could just build, but there's also some fighting involved with Minecraft if you're fighting the monsters, the mobs in that game. But I think most people are focused on the shooter fighter type of games. All right, so a lot of the studies have been correlational in nature. So that is one important limitation, is that with correlational data, you may remember that correlation does not equal causation. That is important to remember. All right, just because two variables are related, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. We do have plenty of evidence for a correlation between violent video game playing and aggression. But we don't know if one causes the other because a lot of the evidence is just from correlational studies. Remember, with correlational studies, there's always the possibility that there's an unmeasured, unaddressed third variable that could be explaining the relationship between those two things. One thing that a lot of people worry about or concerned about is they say, well, let's think, who is going to be most drawn to violent video games? Now, true confession time, full disclosure, I have from time to time played shooter games. My personal opinion is that they were good for venting some of my frustration with the world. When Fortnite was new, I did enjoy trying to do the solo mode and see if I could be the last one standing. I often wasn't. All right, but I enjoyed that game, and many people would put that in the category of, ooh, we shouldn't let our kids play that game. We shouldn't let people play that game. It could make them violent. I don't consider myself a violent person. But in science, you don't focus on anecdotes. You don't focus on individuals. You focus on, the data. You focus on the findings. We do have findings indicating this correlation, but we can't say that it's a causal relationship. You can't say that we have evidence for a cause and effect relationship between playing violent video games and actual real-world aggression. Now, another important issue with this research is how we measure or define aggression. In research, you need to have clear, not vague, clear, specific, operational definitions, where you say exactly what you mean by that phrase, exactly how you're measuring that particular variable. And what we see when we look at a lot of these studies, we see that there hasn't been considerable consistency in how we operationally define aggression. We have defined it various ways, we have measured it various ways. That makes it hard to get a consensus of the findings. One issue is that a lot of people, a lot of researchers, when they have measured aggression, they have not specifically focused on severe aggression, criminal type of aggression. They also include milder types of aggression. And most people who are concerned about the possible effects of violent video games, most of them are concerned with severe, criminal, very dangerous levels of aggression, not so much with lower, milder types of aggression. So some people wonder if we are adequately measuring, or at least not consistently measuring, aggression in these studies. Now, another issue is there may be what we call a publication bias. Okay, so what is that? We do have a problem in science that the studies that tend to be published are very often studies that have a positive finding. Positive meaning they support the hypothesis. All right, when you don't support your hypothesis, it can be very difficult to get your findings published, because there's always going to be that doubt, well, maybe you didn't support your hypothesis because you have a poorly designed study. And it's not as interesting. It's more interesting to find out about results that supported a particular hypothesis. It's less interesting, unfortunately, even when it's important, it is still relevant, it still leads to knowledge, but it's just less interesting to say, oh yeah, we looked for this and didn't find it. All right, so a study that says we look for a link between violent video game playing and aggression and we didn't find one, that's less likely to be published than a study that says we looked for that link and we found one. So we may have a publication bias where the studies that do show a link are more likely to get published and disseminated and heard about than the ones that don't find a link. If they don't find a link, that could be relevant because it's possible there is no link, or maybe it's a weak link. Speaking of the strength of the link or the relationship, one issue is how strong is the link that is supported. Overall, we have seen in a meta-analysis, now you may not know what a meta-analysis is. I know a lot of my upper level students don't know or don't remember what a meta-analysis is. A meta-analysis is when you take a bunch of studies and you examine them together, you do sort of advanced statistical analysis to try to get at the overall effect size. You can also use this type of study to compare different measurements and things like that. But in this case, just looking at if you look at all these studies as a group, overall, what is the effect size, or what is the relationship supported? It is a correlation coefficient. You may remember that term from previous videos. A correlation coefficient of 0.9. Well, this is introductory psychology. Chances are you have not taken statistics. You probably don't have the knowledge to know, well, how strong is that? You may remember that the closer a correlation coefficient is to 1 or -1, the stronger the relationship is. But is 0.9, I mean, is that far enough away from 0, essentially, to say it's a strong relationship? Most people would not consider that a strong relationship. And when people try to come up with recommendations for a small, medium, or large relationship, 0.9 would be like right on the edge of, not 0.9, 0.19. It's like right on the edge of a small relationship. Now the thing is, a small relationship is a relationship. In my work, in my colleagues' work, we often will be trying to publish a study where we have found a small relationship or a small effect. But the idea is usually that we're probably going to be looking at other variables and combining this small relationship with this other. All right, so I got cut off. I ran out of storage space. I had to go delete some videos. So I was talking about with when you're looking at correlations, or when you're looking at effects, whether it's a relationship or an effect from a true experiment, sometimes they're small. All right. So, but the thing is, when you're looking at a small relationship or a small effect, we're often thinking, well, we're going to combine those with other small relationships or effects and look at sort of a composite impact or a composite prediction, meaning more variables involved. this may be something that's appropriate here, that we, instead of just looking at these two variables together, instead of just looking at violent video games and aggression, we may need to consider other variables and how they're related. That it's not just the video games themselves that are explaining the relationship. And so that's another issue. It's a real relationship. Yes, it is there. Yes, it is statistically significant. That doesn't mean that it should be dismissed or ignored. It just means that perhaps we need to bring some more variables in there and understand the probably complex relationship between the actual game playing and real world behavior. All right, so that's the last topic for the chapter on learning. The next chapter that I'm going to be covering in my class will be about developmental psychology. All right, so everything that I've talked about in class, make sure you also read in the textbook and pay attention to any quizzes and things like that. But hopefully that gives you a nice rudimentary basic understanding of learning. Now, some of you may be saying, that's it? That's all we're going to learn about? This is introductory psychology, so we do kind of keep it short and basic. If you are more interested in these topics, we do have a class on my campus called Conditioning and Learning that goes over these topics in more detail, and it might be good for you to take that if you are interested. If you're from another campus, I don't know what's offered there, but see if they offer some other class about learning or behaviorism or conditioning and learning or something like that.